Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Email Beyond Revenue. Really excited to have Thomas Gleeson from Store Hero today, long-term friend and partner of Market Monster, and we are going to talk about something related to e-commerce analytics, which I think is incredibly important, and will show everyone how acquisition and retention are intrinsically tied together. So without further ado, Thomas, do you want to get straight into it?
Yeah, it's first of all really nice to be on, Adam. Great to touch base again. Yeah, today I suppose we kind of touched base during the week, and you were wondering what was a good topic to run through today. And I kind of like to look at some of the calls I've had in the last 2 or 3 weeks and think, what's top of mind for people. At the moment, it's a bit of a hairy time for e-commerce. There's a lot going on from tariffs, inflation, loads and loads going on, and loads to think about. That coupled with AI, changes in Meta, changes in Google, an awful lot to think about. So from my perspective, one of the most interesting things I've come across in the last 6 to 12 months, mainly suppose the last three, to be perfectly honest, is the need for businesses to think about their business in two separate cohorts. You're probably thinking, what are you talking about? So instead of just orientating ourselves towards looking at, are we up this year? Are we down this year? From a revenue perspective, trying to think about them in two separate brackets between our new customers and our repeat customers. Just for context, like we have a lot of brands on the Store Hero platform at this point this year. I would say on average, a lot of our customers are flatlined to maybe 10% up or down. It's not been a huge year of growth. It's not 2020, it's not 2021 out there. And they're often spending more money to acquire these customers. So in a lot of cases, when the strategy is rightly focused on new customer acquisition, even though revenue is flat, maybe plus or minus 10%, profitability can be skewing downwards a little bit this year across some brands, which is interesting from my perspective. And it's the first year I've seen it in a while. But it is so important to think about your business between the split between new and repeat customers, because we have seen quite a change with some brands. Like I'm going to jump into one now, the anonymized data there, but really I think that the issue some businesses are having is that they're trying to maintain revenue, maintain profitability, and not acquire new customers. And you might think, that's great. We have built up this huge Klaviyo list over the last 5 or 10 years. That's what it's there for. And to an extent, you're correct. That is what it's there for. But there's a limit to that, and I think, Adam, you've touched on this over the years as well. The retention, and I was actually reading one of your posts during the week, the retention is really the output of all the work that the acquisition has done over the years. And if you're not going to be able to consistently fill that funnel with new leads and new customers to come in the door, that revenue that you're getting from repeat customers over time is going to wane, and so will your business if that's where you're putting your time and energy. So just before I dive in, would love to get your thoughts, Adam, but I just think it's such an important point to think about that split between new and repeat customers.
Yep, I think you hit the nail on the head. We see it time and time again where a client or a brand will say, oh, the CAC is really high on Meta and Google now, it's unsustainable. Let's increase the email frequency. And there's always a limit to how long that can continue for, because ultimately, I mean, you'll have a lot more data than me. It's generally, you can't get a repeat purchase rate above 30-40% for an exceptional brand. So
Really good brand.
yes, you can increase returning customer revenue, but there's a limit to how you can squeeze the sponge, I think is the common term. And you're not solving the fundamental issue in the business, and it's not going to go away. It needs to be addressed at some point. And as I said, you're going to hit diminishing returns when you pursue that strategy of just relying on returning customers. It can't continue forever.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to share a quick example here of a business. And look, it's not a bad example, but it just kind of illustrates the point I'm talking about. So can you guys see my screen okay?
Yep.
Fantastic. So essentially what we're looking at here is a Store Hero customer. So right now they've centralized all the Shopify information, all their marketing channels, and most importantly, from our perspective, shipping, transaction, fulfillment, all the marginal costs are all baked in here as well. So we're looking at last month, so the whole month of March, and we've actually looked at it compared to the previous year. So what jumps out to me here, and why the business owner was delighted, and rightly so, revenue is up, contribution margin, that profit after any marketing spend increases are up as well. But while that's all positive, there's issues on the horizon here from my perspective. The bulk of the revenue increase has come from repeat customers,
Yep.
and they've massively slowed the growth of new customers. It's actually a negative decline. And they're saying, well, our CAC has increased, our CAC has decreased, revenue is up, we're making all the right decisions. And they are to a certain extent, but they are vanity metrics. And it just goes back to that point of we need to be thinking about growing new customer acquisition in tandem with repeats, because these guys have kind of fallen into a little bit of a bracket where they're thinking the garden is rosy, and it is to an extent. And I'm not trying to be harsh here, but they also need to understand that their number of new customers that they're acquiring on a monthly basis is going down. And this is the same trend this whole year. Revenue is up, profitability is up, contribution margin is up, but in time, this is going to deplete. They have pulled back ad spend pretty significantly. Number of new customers are down. This will be fine in the short run, but in time, this is going to cause the business to suffer. And the lack of investment from a marketing perspective will just have a bigger impact down the road. It mightn't be seen for 3 months, mightn't be seen for 6 months, but I guarantee you, if this strategy continues, when we revisit it this time next year, these numbers are going to unfortunately continue to dwindle.
Yeah, again, going back to what we said in the introduction, we've seen this again time and time again. And it depends, right, about the purchase latency, like what you're selling, whether it's supplements or furniture. This will vary depending on the product life cycle. But we've had so many conversations with brands who have the exact type of dashboards that you've presented here in terms of analytics. And on surface level, everything looks rosy, but you just know probably within a 3-month time frame, the problems are coming down the line, and then the panic sets in. And I think they actually make the problem worse, because rather than addressing the root cause, they increase the email frequency even more, and they really wring out all their customers, and you're causing a lot of pain to solve a short-term a long-term problem in the short term, and you're just not addressing the root cause. So I think they are intrinsically tied together, as we've said, and the fundamental issue is like trying to resolve ways to improve the acquisition, because it's just not something that is sustainable.
And I get it. I get it. We touched on it at the start of the show here. Meta is getting more and more increasingly expensive by the hour. I'm not surprised that brands are shifting this. Everybody's feeling the pinch, but we need to be very, very diligent to make sure that we're not squeezing the sponge too much at the expense of new customer acquisition, because it just is the chickens will come home to roost at some point, and we just want to make sure that instead of just looking at top line metrics, that we are thinking about these customers in two different brackets and almost treating them as two different P&Ls to a certain extent. Every month, every week, whenever we're doing our weekly reports, how are we trending new customer acquisition versus repeat customer acquisition? And also make sure that, and this is where I have seen some people unfortunately fall into the brackets where, maybe the ROAS in platform is looking okay, but when you actually dig into the Meta or Google accounts, they're also targeting a hell of a lot of their ad spend towards repeat customers as well.
Yeah.
And while that's fine to a certain extent, it's the same issue. We don't want to target new customers because it makes our ROAS look bad. It makes our CAC look bad. But if you have a really, really dialed in Klaviyo operation, and then you're putting the lion's share of your ad spend after, retargeting existing customers, you're squeezing that sponge more and more and more at the expense of really trying to fill that funnel up with new, fresh brands. I just can't underscore that point enough.
Is there any practical ways that you have helped brands solve this issue using some of that existing data? As an example, one of the things that we've done quite a lot of is identify what are the commonalities between the high LTV customers, and then feed that to the acquisition teams. When you're looking at this type of analytics and dashboards, like what are some of the practical things that you can use from this data to solve the root cause of the issue here, which is the acquisition problem?
Yeah, so on this page here, I think acquisition MER is a really, really good one. Like, just to kind of maybe set the distinction for anyone who's listening between MER and acquisition MER. MER is essentially your net revenue divided by your total marketing budget. Acquisition MER is net revenue from new customers only divided by our total ad spend. So in that instance, we are putting the full burden of our marketing budget behind new customers only, or new customer revenue only. So thinking about these two in two distinct brackets is incredibly important. But one other thing that we do is, I think it was Roy Keane had a famous quote years ago: "Fail to prepare, prepare to fail." So we have launched a kind of goals and forecasting piece directly in the platform. And essentially when we go in, I'll actually just create a new one very quickly. We have a map built into the tool. So to help essentially brands understand how many new and repeat customers that they need to be driving on a monthly basis that all align with their North Star profitability targets that they've set themselves. And this just makes sure that we're thinking about the customers in their distinct brackets that they need to be captured in. So just to show you very, very quickly here, we set our revenue target, set our full COGS targets, our OPEX that we need to cover as a business, and most importantly, our profit goal. Essentially, what I'm trying to do is work backwards to figure out what the marketing spend and MER needs to be. And you can see there, our new customer split is in here. So important. We need to think about what is the percentage of new customers that we need every month in order to make that happen. We're then going to overlay all of our seasonality from last year. So we have our finance goals in here, but most importantly down here, we know based on these revenue targets, how many new and repeat customers we need each month in order to hit them, so that when we click finish and we log in, I can just have a quick scan here and start to understand where are we on track or off track with different numbers. And, are we on track, or are we over executing from a repeat customer perspective, maybe missing from a new customer perspective. Maybe the numbers look good, but we can quickly start to identify where the winners and losers are within the business itself.
I just want to point out something quickly, actually, that I probably forgot to mention before, that I think is really important. If you are flatlined with your acquisition, then it's super important, in my opinion, to find ways to increase the contribution margin on the first order. I know most people are generally trying to increase AOV, but I think if it is a long-term headwind that you just can't solve, or at least not in the short term, then you have to find very creative ways for the first order to increase the AOV and contribution margin.
The only thing I would say on that, and it's not to counter at all, is that, and it's more just to back up that point. You're so right. If you're struggling to acquire new customers because you can't afford enough for them, we need to think about how to become more profitable on that purchase. And anybody listening is thinking, yes, obviously, of course that's the case, but how do we actually do that? Not everything is a Meta ads problem. Not everything is a Google ads problem. Yes, you can certainly make iterations and changes there to improve how you're acquiring new customers. But for instance, what I'm looking at here is a cohort analysis. Anybody listening here who listens or watches Adam's content is very, very familiar with what we're looking at. We're trying to understand the distinction here between cost to acquire a customer and first order value. We've seen some brands where we've actually managed to get them to increase their customer acquisition cost by €10. There's one in particular, not this one. Last year, from July to December, CAC increased by €10. Sounds like the worst sales pitch of all time. But what we were actually able to do was tighten up on a lot of the discounts that they were giving out, tighten up on some of the buy now, pay later solutions that maybe they didn't need, and really just tighten up the margins. They were giving out too much free shipping, they were giving out too much blanket site-wide discounts. And we actually managed to increase the gross margin on first purchase by €10. And that allowed us to spend €10 extra to acquire more new customers. So it was net, it was net neutral. But because we were spending so much more to acquire customers, naturally the new customer base rose tremendously. Essentially, it didn't cost us any more as a business. So just trying to get brands to think about that. Not everything is a Meta or a Google problem. There is on-site optimizations around offer structure, discounting structure, all that kind of thing that can massively influence and increase your ability to get a higher value on first purchase, which enables you, in theory, to spend more money to acquire them as well.
Yeah, it's not black and white. Absolutely. There's a lot of nuance to it, and every business is different and needs to experiment to find that sweet spot and never stop trying to test new angles and optimizations. So appreciate you coming on, man, sharing your knowledge. Obviously, what's the next step that people can contact you and learn more and potentially try Store Hero?
Sure, no problem at all. You can get me on LinkedIn at Thomas Gleeson, or you could check out our website at storehero.ai. If you mentioned you listen to this, more than happy to jump on and do the demo call myself and run through a deep audit of the store.
Amazing. Well, you heard it there directly, guys. I'll stop things here, but thank you again for your time, mate.
Thanks very much, Adam.